Do you ever feel like your English is near perfect in your head, but then when you actually get into a professional setting or a high stakes meeting, you freeze, hesitate, or just completely choke? Today, I'm going to give you a 3 step executive framework to have authority when you speak, even when you're nervous or you feel like you're a little bit underprepared. Keep in mind that this is an advanced English communication framework that is used by some of the most well spoken people I've ever heard or interacted with in English. If you're new here, welcome to ARC English. We help professionals go from intermediate to advanced English by working smarter and not necessarily by working harder. Now, I am a business person myself, but keep in mind that this framework can be applied to many different professional settings in many different industries. Now, the first part of this 3 part framework is called the PrEP structure. Simply put, PrEP stands for point, reason, example, and point. Again, the PrEP structure is a mental model used to give persuasive and concise answers in real time. It prevents rambling when you're talking a lot, but you're not really getting to the point. Keep in mind that some of the most well spoken people in the English language actually try to keep things concise and get straight to the point. They feel that less is actually more. Being an advanced English speaker does not necessarily mean that you just know how to talk a lot or use a lot of fancy words. The most well spoken people actually try to keep things and deliver their message as simple as possible. Now, to go through the 4 points of this structure, the first one, point. All this means is just stating your main idea clearly. For example, if your company is going to launch a product, you could say, I believe that we should delay the product launch for another 2 weeks. That is an example of just stating your main idea clearly and in a simple, concise fashion. Reason. Reasoning means exactly what it sounds like. You're just giving the reason why you made your main point. So, for example, if you think the company should delay the product launch by 2 weeks, you can give your reasoning and say it's because there are bugs with the current product and it's not ready to be sent out to the public. Example. This simply just means to provide an example after your reasoning. And typically, you want your example to be based on a real fact and not something that is less tangible or less real. So, for example, you could say, when we tested the product yesterday, a certain percentage of the people who used it on the test could not complete their purchase or could not complete a certain action. You're giving an example of why there are actually bugs. You're giving an example of a real bug in the product that you explained earlier. And then the final part of the structure is P, which just is point again. All this means is just to restate your point that you initially stated, just to conclude your statement. So, for example, you're just going to reiterate, I believe we should delay the product launch because there are bugs. Now, this might sound very simple, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, this is easy. This is like beginner level English stuff that I could do. But honestly, just by being more concise, just by being more straight to the point, will actually constitute advanced communication in English. Because believe me, a lot of people actually do not do this. Now, depending on what your native language is and where you come from in the world, it may be different in your culture, but in the culture of most English speaking regions in the world, actually speaking more concise like this actually makes you sound more articulate, more well spoken, and most importantly, it actually gives you some authority to what you're saying if you are straight to the point. When you communicate concisely using a structure like the PrEP structure, it makes you sound more authoritative because it makes it sound like you've already thought this through. You've already compiled your thoughts. You've already done the analysis in your head. You sound prepared. You sound like you are actually backing up everything you're saying too. You sound like you know what you're talking about. This gives you authority. And this leads to the second part of the framework, which is signposting. Now, simply put, signposting is just using certain words or phrases to give hints to the listener on where the conversation is going or where your statement is going. This is a little bit more of an intangible thing to pick up on when you're communicating in English with other advanced speakers, particularly in a professional setting. Specifically in the business world, you really need to pick up on these nuances to read between the lines, as we would say, and understand what is truly being said and what is truly trying to be conveyed behind the words that they're using. To understand this in English, we would say that is called taking a hint or taking the hint. So, in other words, signposting is like a GPS to a conversation, except you're the one who gets to choose where you lead it and where it goes based on the words that you want to use to hint at or convey a certain message. Now, keep in mind that signposting does not necessarily need to be used in a good way or positive way or used in a negative way. It can be very neutral. Examples of neutral uses of signposting would be the following. If you want to list off points, for example, you could say the three main reasons for this happening are number one, blah, 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 number two, this and that, and then number three, this and that. You're simply just listing things off. It doesn't necessarily need to be a positive or a negative way to lead the conversation. It's just a authoritative and concise way to do so, but still in a neutral setting. You can also use this to change the topic of conversation. You can be doing this for better, or you could be doing it for worse, or it could be neutral. For example, if somebody is talking about something you are uncomfortable about, you can just simply say, anyway, moving on to this subject. Or if someone is talking about the weather outside when you should be talking about your company's budget forecast, you could say, okay, moving on to the budget forecast, just to keep things going along, just to keep things flowing and leading the conversation where you want it to go. You can also use signposting to emphasize something. This is something that advanced English communicators do very well. If somebody just gave a long presentation in a professional setting, or they just gave somebody a lot of information all at once, they may just try to emphasize one, maybe a few things at the end of their presentation or at the end of their statement, just so the listener can actually take that away and remember it. So, for example, once you're finished what you're saying, if you gave a lot of information, you could say, I just want to highlight this one detail here, or I want to put emphasis on this particular detail, or these two things are the most important out of everything that we just discussed. You can be completely transparent about this in English. So, for example, at the end of all my YouTube videos, including this one, I will recap the main points of the video and the main takeaway from each one of the points that you should remember or take home with you. And finally, you can also use signposting to summarize a statement if the statement was really long or it gave a lot of information all at the same time. Similar to emphasizing things, you can just say to summarize what we discussed, this was the main point, this was the point that complements it, and this is the most important thing that you need to know, for example. Now, again, it depends on where in the world you're from and what your culture is, but I see a lot of non-native English speakers simply kind of ramble on about certain topics that aren't exactly important to the conversation, or maybe they communicate about things in a really long-winded way, or they're way too descriptive, or they're talking for way too long. But when you speak in a concise manner, and you actually lead the conversation intentionally, and you use these expressions that I gave you to really segue the conversation and put it in the direction that you want to put it, this makes you sound 100 times more authoritative during presentations, particularly in professional settings. Again, in other words, to summarize what I just said, less is more. Also, if you do not speak English as a first language and you need help with your English for work purposes, very soon we're going to be releasing a training program where we will actually customize an action plan based on what your profession is and what your career goals are. So if you'd like to learn more about that, I'll leave a link somewhere in the description or the pinned comment below. And the final step of the framework comes down to professional stalling phrases or filler words. Now, again, this is a very advanced communication technique. Even native English speakers need time to think between statements. Also, keep in mind that most native English speakers are actually between, I would say, the C1 and C2 level or something like that. Honestly, a lot of native English speakers might even be at the B2 level if they grew up with very poor education. So, this advanced technique is really just a good communication tip for anybody. It's not mutually exclusive to non native English speakers or native English speakers. So, if you're a non native English speaker, don't feel bad if you do this a lot. Many native English speakers do this too. Typically, during conversation, the average person, the average English speaker uses the word or as a filler word to think about what they want to say next. Now, you might think that this is just a small thing, and at the end of the day, who actually cares if you say or sometimes? But it really does kill your authority, especially in a lot of professional conversations. If you want to sound confident and you want to sound like you know what you're talking about, and if you want to instill trust in the other person you're speaking to in a professional setting, you should make an honest effort to try to not use or as a filler word when you're communicating. Also, staying silent and staring into space, just thinking, can sometimes make you look like you're really unsure about what you are talking about. Now, very advanced communicators in English actually use stalling phrases to buy themselves a bit of time to think about what they want to say next without really killing their authority when it comes to how they communicate. For example, if someone asks you a very difficult question, such as, is a tomato a fruit or is it a vegetable? I'm just being facetious here, but let's just go with that. You could simply respond with a stalling phrase, such as, that's a very insightful question. Let me think about it and get back to you. Or, that's a good question. Let me evaluate and get back to you. In professional settings, it's also okay to be honest a lot of the time, too, if you don't know the answer to a question. So, for example, if someone asks you, is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable? You could say, that's a good question. I'll double check and I'll get back to you this evening. You still sound professional, even though you are showing uncertainty. You should also use English stalling phrases when you want to clarify what somebody is asking if you do not understand what they asked. So, for example, French is my second language. Although I am still fluent, sometimes I still just want to be 100% sure that I understood or heard what they said correctly. So, if English is not your first language and you want to just be 100% sure that you clearly understood what someone was trying to ask you, you could simply say something along the lines of, just so I'm 100% clear, are you asking about, or just to be 100% sure, is this what you're asking? And then you can try to reiterate what they just asked. You can also use stalling phrases to reflect upon something. Now, as mentioned in the first part of the framework, if you convey your thoughts in a concise way using the prep structure, it sounds like you've already collected your thoughts. You've already taken the time to analyze and reflect things. And now you're delivering it in a confident, concise way, like you've already done your homework and you know what you're talking about. If someone brings up a point that you have not evaluated in your head and you have not done your homework on, and that you are not quite sure about yet, you can still speak with authority simply by saying something along the lines of this. I've actually been thinking about this lately, and I haven't concluded how I feel about this yet. You can say something along the lines of that to still sound professional and authoritative, but still showing again that you have some uncertainty about the point that they brought up without sounding unprofessional or unconfident. And if someone just brings up a point that you had never, ever even considered, you should definitely use a stalling phrase and just say, good points. I'm glad you brought that up. That's actually very important to address. And even though we haven't touched on this yet, we should definitely start the conversation. So, if somebody says something to you in English and you don't quite understand it or you feel uncertain about how to answer, be sure to use a stalling phrase. It's going to make you sound confident, even though you are showing uncertainty. So, to recap the 3 step framework, the first part is the prep framework, which just allows you to speak concisely, get straight to the point. Remember, less is more. The second part of the framework is signposting, which just allows you to lead and gear the conversation towards where you want it to go to. To do this, you should have already reflected and prepared what you were going to say before you say it. And the third part of the framework, which I believe is the most important, is being able to use stalling phrases when you are completely uncertain about a point or a question that somebody brings up. By doing this, it'll make you sound confident, even though you're completely unsure about what was brought up. So if you're ever stuck in a tough, high stakes meeting or professional context and you're uncertain about what you need to say, use these advanced English communication techniques to keep your authority and keep your professionalism, even though you are uncertain and even though English may not be your first language and you might have a difficult time communicating certain points. For more advice to better your English and go from intermediate up to advanced, be sure to subscribe to this channel and leave a comment down below letting me know where you're from and what your native language is. I'm always curious to know. And if you want to learn how reading can actually enhance your speaking skills in English, be sure to watch the next video on the screen.